Bill seeks to end vulture practices in kids' sports. What's best for our kids? What's best for our family? Those should be the central questions Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut says of youth sports. Instead, private equity owners ask, what can make me the most money? I mean, this is just a natural extension of having, youth sports be like any other industry in the economy, right? Of course, people are going to seek to capitalize on it, like because it's capitalism. Murphy was speaking Wednesday, May 13th, at the U.S. Capitol as he and Representative Chris Deluzio introduced the Let's Kids Play Act, a new federal bill that takes aim at private equity firms operating within youth sports. The bill defines what the Congress members call vulture practices, such as requiring that families stay at specific hotels for kids' sports tournaments, which is called stay to play or something like that. I've heard about this. This is a big problem in youth hockey right now, where if your team, it's very common for a B level, single A, double A, everything up until triple A to do one or two big tournaments a year. You play in your sort of local league where you play teams maybe across your state where you might have to travel, an hour or two or three to get to a rink nearby to play one of those teams, which is something you can do in a day. But once or twice a season, you do some big tournament where you go to Nashville or you go to Niagara Falls or you go to California or you make a big trip out of it and it becomes a whole weekend thing. You have to stay at a hotel. Well, the people who run these tournaments make deals with the hotels saying, hey, if you want to play in the tournament, you have to stay at this expensive ass hotel. It's really messed up. It's actually super predatory and it feels especially gross when it's in the realm of kids sports. That's already getting way too expensive. And adds momentum to a congressional hearing in December that addressed what it called a crisis in the industry. Yeah, I remember youth sports being crazy expensive when I was younger, when I was under 18, and that was 10 years ago, 11 years ago. So I can only imagine how expensive it is now, especially for something like hockey, right? I've heard of baseball and soccer tournaments being $5,000 or not tournaments, leagues or seasons or whatever for select being $5,000 a season, which is crazy for sports that don't have that high of an operating cost, right? Look at something like hockey. Those can go up to $10,000 plus easily, especially when you take into account the whole academy system and everything. The youth sports industry generates more than $40 billion in annual revenue and is fueled by parents often paying thousands of dollars per kid to participate. I remember for me personally, I played for the Allen Americans youth ice hockey team there. I believe their single A team. And the only reason when I was a sophomore in high school or a freshman, that was the last season I did hockey. And the only reason I was able to do that was because they offered me a scholarship where they cut the cost of everything in half. So instead of being $5,000 to play for the season, it was only $2,500, which was still a ton of money and very difficult, I think, for my parents to be able to afford. But it made it just barely affordable. But without that, there's no way I would have been able to do it that last season. I say this over and over again. Youth sports should not be a luxury item. Deluzio told USA Today Sports. In my part of the world, you ask people, no matter their politics, should kids be able to play, no matter if their parents were rich or poor? They'd say absolutely. So I think we have to do something because this is going on, not just in Western Pennsylvania. Apparently, this is a huge problem in Canada too, specifically with hockey, because if you look at the percentage of people or percentage of players that make it to professional AAA or higher level NHL level hockey, something 80+% of them come from families that are above the median income level, which shows that and that shouldn't be surprising for a sport like hockey. It's a notoriously expensive sort of rich white person sport, but it just demonstrates just how even in Canada, a place where they have tons of rinks that are literally funded by the government through a government program. They were built by them, so you'd think the cost would be even lower. That even they are experiencing such a tremendous youth sports cost issue right now. We're seeing this play out all over America. And it's not like this is some new novel idea, right? There's a precedent for this specifically in Norway. Their youth sports participation rate is one of the highest in the world, despite it being a particularly high cost of living place, right? And the reason for that is they have something called the Children's Rights to Sports policy there that regulates aspects of youth sports safety. It regulates, and especially the really important one is cost. It ensures that things are not allowed to get too expensive, and that it creates a culture of fostering rather than it ensures that too much vulture capitalism cannot eke its way into youth sports over there. I think I saw a statistic like something like 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 children in Norway play in some sort of sports league, which is incredible. Those are numbers that you should strive for in any country, because I think it's extremely important for children to be put in youth sports and to play them throughout their childhood, right? It not only burns a lot of energy, it not only helps their growth, it not only helps their intelligence, but I think it provides a foundation for a healthy future. Once you learn to love athletics, once you learn to love competition and sports as a child, you will seek that out as an adult, and you will be a healthier, more well-rounded member of society, I think, because of it. And probably I wouldn't be surprised if there's some statistics out there that show that like people who have participated in a lot of youth sports when they were younger have like more financial success and more traditional business type success later on in life. So there's got to be a ton of knock-on effects to this sort of thing. The bill seeks to hold private equity companies accountable for their activity within youth sports. It would ban vulture investors. A vulture practice, according to the legislation, is any practice, term, condition, tactic, instrument, method, or act that causes harm or creates long-term risk of harm to an acquired entity in order to extract profit, assets, or other value for the benefit of a covered firm or its affiliates. Damn, they used all the synonyms here, right? Practice, term, condition, tactic, instrument, method, or act. They're going all in on that one. And I like how they did that, because like so many of these practices, the ways that so many of these for-profit like youth sports holding firms operate is they'll come into an area, and at first keep prices the same or lower than they were originally, with the intention of creating an effective monopoly or to consolidate market control so that they can then leverage that later on and increase their prices and take it and exploit people and take advantage. And ultimately, the negative impact of all of this is not some dude getting rich at the expense of potentially middle-class poor families. It's less kids playing sports. It is poor families being squeezed out of the bottom. And it's in middle-class income families having to make very difficult choices over whether their kid gets to go play baseball with their friends or gets to, maybe go on that once every couple of years family vacation or something, right? Like, that's not a decision that, like, in 2026 in the United States, they should be having to make, right? They should, if they're a contributing member of society and they're doing their job and everything like that, they should be able to do that. The literature gets into further detail about what such practices might look like. We have a precedent for this, right? I wonder if this literature, it has to reference the Norway, children's rights to sports policy. There's some documentary I watched about the Norway children's rights to sports policy recently, or short documentary, a video or something. Maybe I'll link that or put the thumbnail for it here on the video. But I remember it taught me a lot about this and opened my eyes to the different possibilities of the ways that this could be handled. The bill also requires these investors to give full refunds to families for junk fees collected through vulture practices, cancels predatory contracts, and wipes out any outstanding debts, interest, or late fees that were imposed by the private equity firms. As great of as an idea this is, I think there's a reason why the signer and the co-sponsor were two Democrats, congresspeople, right? I just have a feeling that the Republicans are so beholden to business interests at this point in time that I think, even they might agree that the sentiment behind this is good and the result of it would be good, right? It would literally result in more kids participating in youth sports, but their desire to see people, to be business biased, to basically facilitate the conditions that allow rich people to exploit the system, to play the capitalism game, outweighs basically everything, outweighs even youth sports, even youth health. And so I see no way that this would get enough support by Republicans to actually get passed, which is a shame. It also holds that firms liable for debts and safety violations and establishes a youth sports fund for penalties paid or money taken from private equity companies. According to the bill, the fund would be used to provide scholarships, reduced costs for families, and keep local fields open for free community use. The Let Kids Play Act is based on a really simple premise. Wall Street and private equity have no business in kids' sports, said Representative Pramila Jayapal, who co-led the legislation and has helped launch the Monopoly Busters caucus in the House of Representatives. Yeah, especially anything backed by Pramila Jayapal, I think to some extent they're gonna want to they're gonna want to reject just because it's her, because she's a boogeyman to the right, and she's one of those ultra lib ladies they don't like. Wall Street and private equity have no business in kids' sports. Well, I would take that premise and extend it a bit further, especially to something like healthcare. There's a reason why the U.S. pays more for worse outcomes than literally every other developed nation and a whole bunch of developing second world nations. The reason why is because of Wall Street and private equity and our mixed system that allows for-profit middlemen to get between you and your doctor, to allow these insurance companies to have 20+% administrative fees, significantly up the cost of healthcare. I would extend this to other sectors of the economy in an ideal world, this reasoning here. What is private equity as it pertains to youth sports? Jay Adya, managing partner of Elysian Park Ventures, a platform that invests in and seeks opportunities for sports around the world, says private equity, as opposed to early stage vulture capitalism, is much later stage investments in much more mature companies, and typically, but not always, kind of control or owned positions. Something that needs to be kept in mind throughout all of this is like, these companies that are coming in and taking control over youth sports in areas and developing market control and sometimes full-on monopolies are not doing it out of the goodness of their hearts or altruism or the love of youth sports, as they would probably like to put it as, right? It's just for profit. It's just a different kind of business for them. And I don't blame them, right? Don't hate the player, hate the game, right? The problem isn't people trying to squeeze out a living or to find success in the system we've built. The problem is the way that the system is structured, the system we've built. Where and how capital is used and for what purposes to solve what problems is where we try to spend our time, he said at last week's Project Place Summit in Boston. To solve what problems? Yeah, the problems of trying to squeeze out as much profit as reasonably possible, or not even as just as possible from an area. Like, it's not, of course they're going to try and frame that like there's some altruistic actor, but they're just not. Catherine Van Dyke, who has litigated against Varsity Brands, challenging its monopolization of cheerleading. We hear a lot about these firms building ecosystems. And what those ecosystems are really just what we like to call in the antitrust world moats or walled gardens. And they're designed to keep innovators out and keep families and kids trapped inside. And that's how you end up with things like stay to play and having to pay an entry fee to watch your own kid play. It's why you have vertical integration and roll-ups, so that by controlling an entire sport or an entire industry, your customers, who in that case are families and children, have no choice but to use all of your products and services and platforms. It's what allows them to load the companies with debt and strip their assets. And none of those things are aimed at child development. They're aimed at extraction, of course. Is the Let Kids Play Act a shot at travel sports? Travel sports will be the ones most affected by this. To some extent, this is a problem with the way like youth sports are set up in general. I know at least the case for hockey, there's house league and then there's the varying levels of travel league above that. And that if you're too good for house league, that your only option to play with better players and to improve and to have a better experience is to go to travel. There's really no other choice. So yes, I would imagine that this is sort of a particularly strong shot at travel sports because they're the ones that are going to be affected most acutely by this. It's aimed at large entities like Black Bear Sports, which consolidates ice rinks and hockey teams across the Northeast and Midwest, and has leveraged that control to steer families into its own costly system of leagues, tournaments, and fees. There are a bunch of them, Deluzio told USA Today Sports. Varsity Brands, which has had litigation and settlements, has really faced scrutiny currently for what they've done. And I'm sure we could list a bunch of others, but we're going at the practices. We're going at the worst conduct here. Murphy, the Connecticut senator, said his 14-year-old son plays in a youth hockey league that is controlled by Black Bear. I do admit that I'm one of those parents that's fallen victim to the allure of expensive travel sports, he said. Well, it's not an allure, right? If you want your kid to play high-level sports and to continue to improve and maybe even have a chance at like making a career of it later in life, you have to engage with the travel sports system. It's not like it's an allure. There's like no option, really. I admit that I bear some of the responsibility for our fate. Not everything in the world needs to be a run for profit. I totally agree. What happens when profit matters most? Well, first prices go up and a lot of kids are priced out. That's my biggest problem with this. Is it's not that like some middle income or maybe even high income families are going to have more money extracted from them, right? I mean, ideally that's not desirable either. You want that money to be used on other parts of the economy. That's the real problem to me, because I sort of experienced that to some degree. I understand what it's like to be in a family who can't or can barely afford or has to make tough decisions over whether you're going to play in this hockey league or whether you're going to play in this lacrosse league or baseball league or whatever. And like if you're going to be able to do a family vacation or if you're going to be able to go to that family reunion or whatever it may be. Decisions you shouldn't be having to make in 2026 in the United States of America. High-pressure travel leagues are prioritized over low-pressure local leagues, which often isn't good for kids. And youth sports starts to mirror professional sports, with individual achievement being prioritized over team achievement. Well, like I said, there isn't really much of a choice, if it's like a skill level thing. Right? In Texas, in Dallas, you can't play high-level house league. That doesn't exist, right? If you're a AA or a AAA, 16-year-old ice hockey player, right? You can't just go down to house league. It's not going to be, you're going to dominate. It's not going to be fun for anybody, and you're not going to improve. You improve by playing with people that are just as good or better, especially with people who are better than you. So you want to strive to play in the highest skill division you possibly can get into. If you're really interested in improving, if you're really passionate about the sport, it's not just like hype or FOMO to play in these leagues. It's baked into the system. We are not just applying this bill to entities based on the corporate structure. We are applying this bill based on the practices that companies use. Murphy and DeLuzio point specifically to stay-to-play tournaments, which require families to stay at specific, sometimes higher-priced hotels and at organizations charging fees for the streaming of games instead of allowing parents to stream them themselves. I remember even seeing some places, this wasn't around when I was younger, but I've heard of stories of recent tournaments and certain like hockey leagues where like you are literally not allowed to come in and stream like if you brought your own camera, you're in the stands, right? You're the parent of some kid. You bring your own camera and you want to stream that footage to Facebook or to Instagram or something, somewhere that some other people, your grandparents across the country can see, that you are like, you have to sign an agreement saying, I will not do this. This is not allowed. I can be kicked out if I do this, which is absurd, which is insanity. And so many of these hockey rinks, too, have deals with companies like Live Barn, who have cameras set up in the rafters, who like charge you, of course, a subscription fee to get onto the website and actually either view it live or watch recordings back. And a lot of those places have agreements and like legal structures in their specific states that ban people from doing exactly what I mentioned, bringing their own cameras, streaming their own thing. I know most of the time, as far as I understand, I think it is actually okay to record the games, but you're not allowed to stream them or something. There's a bunch of, it can get nuanced and weird, but just the whole concept of it is messed up, regardless if it's talking about or banning raw recording or streaming or whatever, right? If it's your own kid and you're paying for it for him to play in that league or that tournament or whatever, of course you should have the ability to stream that footage to your grandparents, right? Because like, let's be real, right? Nobody's making money off of doing that, okay? Nobody's making money like streaming their 14-year-old son playing in a single A ice hockey tournament or whatever to like 10,000 people and making a bunch of money doing it. I mean, you're streaming it to like 3 people, right? You're streaming it to your grandparents across the country and like maybe your aunt who's super into hockey or something, right? Like at best. I remember watching one of the kids' parents videotaping a game from the very corner of the arena at a really bad angle, and I asked why. And the reason was they were afraid we were going to be docked points in the standings if it was discovered that he was. Murphy said, "Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about, right? He's trying to skirt the rules of whatever tournament that they're in. The insane rules that they're not allowed to record or stream the footage or whatever." The intended target of the bill, DeLuzio suggested, isn't for-profit travel organizations as much as firms engaging in practices that have really hurt families, such as take-it-or-leave-it terms, multiple season contracts, non-refundable tuition, and mandatory tournaments that sometimes require travel. We see systems that also mine kids' data for profit, apps, and websites for league registration that any parent who has kids knows if you don't have the app, you don't even get the schedule. And those apps are mining data, physical metrics, financial data, you name it, All of this adds up to locking families in, raising prices, and squeezing family. What are the long-term effects of the bill? Can it reduce the cost of youth sports? I would imagine yes, right? It seems like if it's structured, especially if it's structured anywhere similar to what the Norway children's rights to sports policy or bill or whatever is structured, then absolutely it would. The law would empower parents and state attorneys to sue companies that engage in vulture practices, but it has to pass first. It is backed by Democrats and will ultimately need to be signed by President Donald Trump. There's no freaking way that Trump would sign this. I don't see any way. He's far too beholden to business interests, right? I think there's no way you'd get enough Republican support for this. But even if you somehow did, I think Donald Trump himself is way too beholden to business interests. And I'm sure he's buddies or has some third string connection to the people at Black Bear or some of these private vulture company, private equity sports youth sports companies. And so I'd be shocked if this kind of thing actually made it through. However, like December's hearing that described practices in youth sports as rising to a crisis level, the Let Kids Play Act, even if it doesn't pass, continues to raise awareness about the inequities in the industry. As Van Dyke said at the Project Play Summit last week, it's up to parents to get involved by contacting their Congress members or city council and pushing back against the system if they don't like something about it. We're going to fight to get this bill done, but the public relations effort here may have a shaming impact on the industry, which will help kids and families, Murphy says. 100% right. There is value in trying to get bills passed and at least introducing them to Congress and getting a vote on them, even if you know that the bill is dead in the water. It opens the door. It's not like we're going to go from never having a vote on it in Congress to having one vote on it in Congress and it getting instantly passed, right? It will go through many iterations and there will have to be a number of failed attempts before it actually gets to the point that it's passed. It lays the groundwork. So yeah, I think this is a great idea. I'm all for this. I experienced this with golf too, right? I mean, I know golf is also another one of those notoriously very expensive sports. And some people might hand wave away and be like, oh yeah, golf's expensive, you shouldn't care about that. But I joined the high school golf team in 9th grade, and it only cost us like $200 a semester or something like that because, most of the cost was coverage. School sports budget would cover something like baseball or football or something like that. They also cover a huge part of the cost for golf too. And a lot of these schools develop deals with the local courses because during middle of a weekday, a lot of these courses aren't getting as much business as they otherwise would. So making a deal with a high school or something so their high school students can come in and practice fills some of those gaps and you get a good deal out of it. And so we were able to pay like $200 a semester for me to go and play, as much golf as I wanted after class on weekdays. I played varsity from the end of freshman year all the way through senior year. I got much, much better. For a while, I was very interested in potentially playing college golf. But the problem is playing the once a month tournaments through the school where you play other schools is important, but it's just not enough, right? You need to be able to afford to play individual third-party tournaments. And I would do a handful of them, right? I would do maybe 3 or 4 a year or something like that, just, whatever my parents could potentially afford. But I could never do any of the really big ones. I could never do as many as I wanted to. And, for something like a kid, and I think he should be able to go out there, or he or she should be able to play as many of these damn tournaments as they want to. Live their best life, to improve to the best of their abilities, to be given the tools to potentially make it to college golf or make it to professional golf, right? It shouldn't be about how wealthy your parents are, but currently it is so much about how much access to resources you have, which I remember that specific dynamic has had a large impact on me throughout my life. This, wanting to do this, wanting to play more golf and whatnot, but just not being able to. Because, I didn't win the birth lottery. I don't have some grandpa who is willing to drop $50,000 a year on me on golf and all my equipment and tournament fees and travel and whatnot because he's obsessed with golf and he's independently wealthy. Some people are lucky like that, but not everybody. I remember when I did play, the couple of tournaments I could get my parents to pay for, a couple times a year. The kids you'd play with, you talk with them. You're spending 5 hours in a tournament with somebody on the golf course, right? Each day for multiple days in a row, right? So you're going to be able to you talk about them with all kinds of stuff, right? And I could, through direct conversations and just implications and conversations and whatnot, I could tell that most of these people, that was the case, right? Their parents were rich and they could buy whatever clubs they wanted, whatever balls they wanted, as much of it as they wanted. They could play in as many or as few of tournaments as they wanted, wherever they wanted. They could travel as much as they want, or they have a rich grandpa that does it, who's obsessed with golf and is rich and is willing to drop all that money on them, right? I met very, very few people that were in my sort of same financial situation as a child whose parents can't really afford them. And I'll say that, like, when you can only play like 2 or 3 or 4 tournaments like that a year, right? They become much more meaningful, but not in a good way, right? If it's something like a vacation or a nice dinner, maybe you'd be like, yeah, you value it more then. It's more meaningful to you. But with something like sports and something like a high pressure like golf, right? It's all about like focus, and there's a huge pressure element that, like, you start to get in your own head about it. You're like, well, this is the one chance I get. If I don't do well here, it might be 3 or 4 months until I have another chance, and you put it creates this extra pressure that, like, people who can play 3 tournaments a month don't feel. They sort of feel like, oh, if I don't do well, I'm playing again next week. It doesn't matter, right? But if you're only playing once every 3 or 4 months, you're just like, oh, if I got to do well. I got to do well. If I don't get the top 20% here, I don't qualify for this thing, and then I won't be able to do anything. And it's very unfortunate. It's just all created too, right? It's just all so contrived. So, like, it's just so unnecessary. We more than have the resources and capabilities to allow kids to play as much sports as their hearts desire, right? So yeah, I'm a big fan of something like this. There's a good precedent for this. Look into the children's rights to sports policy in Norway. And I would love for us to create some sort of system that models off of that, or some sort of policy or bill or whatever. I think that would be great. I don't think it'll happen. Like I said, I think the Republicans are far too beholden to business interests to want to do something like that. But you can hope and pray, and then maybe at some point in the future, we will have the political dynamic in this country to allow for something like that to happen.